Hi there. Once again, thank you so much for spending part of your day with us here on Leading Edge. I'm your host, Jeff Smith. Coming up, it's being called a game changer, but what is the real impact of next year's opening of the Gordie Howe International Bridge? You're going to hear directly from the Bridge Authority. But first, we are living through what will undoubtedly be the redefining of college sports as we know it. The NCAA is about to not only settle a series of multi-million-dollar lawsuits, but also embark on the potential of a revenue-sharing program that will see Power 5 conference teams flooded with cash, $20 million a year to be exact, to distribute out to its players. And this week, we dive into it with the college football editor-in-chief of The Athletic, Stewart Mandell, and asking him about this redefinition of sports as we know it.
Obviously, this coming season will be the first year of a 12-team playoff, which is a huge change for this sport. I think the sport's still figuring out the transfer portal and NIL, but obviously from a structural standpoint, the fact that after all these years where the NCAA fought, vehemently against college athletes receiving any sort of payment, they've been forced through a court settlement now that they agreed to establish a model of revenue sharing. And that settlement in the House case has both back pay, where they're going to pay $2.7 billion to this class of athletes that sued them, but then going forward, established as a framework where schools will be allowed to pay as much as $22 million a year. Remember, this is not finalized yet, but the proposal directly to athletes. They refer to it as revenue sharing, but really they are paying the athletes for the first time.
So with that framework that he mentioned right there, we know how it's been, right? The big revenue sports have been football and basketball. And under this new umbrella, will it be the same? We asked him that.
Schools are going to invest more in the sports that generate the most revenue, and football and men's basketball are those. But it's not like this court settlement specifies how the schools spend their money. It'll be up to them. And there are obviously, you have to take Title IX into consideration, and nobody has answered that yet. Is it expected that you split this money equally between men's and women's athletes? Is that not necessarily the case? And then obviously, some schools, Nebraska volleyball is a huge deal there. Like, I would imagine the star volleyball players are going to get paid. Other schools have their, certain sports that they're particularly invested in. So I think it will vary greatly from one school to the next.
What's so confusing about the timing of all of this that we've been inundated over the last 2 years or so with those three initials, NIL, name, image, and likeness, and what that means as far as an athlete being able to brand him or herself to make more money. We asked Stewart from The Athletic, once again joining us here on Leading Edge, we asked him, how does this potential of revenue sharing differ from NIL dollars?
NIL was always meant to be that the athletes got paid by third parties. Now, what they intended those third parties to be were Dr. Pepper and external companies, brands, Caitlin Clark being on insurance commercials. What it quickly turned into was boosters pooling their money into these collectives that would then give the athletes NIL deals, but for very, minimal requirements of charity appearances and whatnot. It was mostly just a means to pay your athletes, but it had to come from outside the university. And now what we're talking about here is if you're referring to it as NIL, it's use of their name, image, and likeness on TV broadcasts. That was really the crux of that lawsuit, that the athletes should be entitled to a share of the TV revenue because it's their images and likeness on the TV broadcast. Now, there's several different buckets that went into coming up with that number. TV is one of them, ticket sales was another, and sponsorships was another. But this is money that goes directly into the coffers of the athletic department, whereas to this point, when you hear about guys getting an NIL deal, it's usually through a third-party collective.
As soon as talk of this agreement, the potential of this agreement came out, there were a lot of those out there that said, my goodness, we are starting to see collegiate athletes turn into professionals, semi-professionals. I asked Stewart that question specifically, if we are seeing the beginnings of what could be sort of a semi-pro league in collegiate athletics.
College athletics has been branded, if you will, for my whole lifetime as they're amateurs, right? They are there for the love of the school, and the NCAA would tell you they're students first and athletes second. But I think it became harder and harder for the public to believe that when they start seeing that the Big Ten is getting a $1 billion a year TV deal, or that Dabo Swinney is making more than $10 million a year to be the head coach of Clemson. College athletics has been a big business for a long, long time. It's just that there are only certain people who are allowed to profit from that business: coaches, ADs, TV networks, bowl games. The people who are playing in the games were the last group left who are not allowed to profit off it. And now that barrier has come down. And if somebody wants to say that's professional, that they're now professional athletes, yeah, that is, technically they are. But I don't think that's going to change the product you see on Saturdays. The fact that, the star quarterback at Georgia is now making money to play college football that he wasn't before. He's still the same guy. He's still going to throw touchdown passes. He's still wearing the same uniform. I don't think the actual product is going to change.
This settlement, the talk of the revenue sharing, it will help the OSUs, the U of M's. But what about the BGSUs and the UTs of the world? We'll talk about that right after this. Welcome back to Leading Edge. I'm Jeff Smith. The NCAA's talk of a revenue sharing plan with the likes of Ohio State and Michigan could redefine how schools operate and how fans buy in. But what about those schools that are not included in this potential surge of cash? What are they going to do to compete? Here's more of my discussion with Stewart Mandell of The Athletic.
I don't think anybody's under any assumption that Toledo would. I mean, Toledo could choose not to revenue share at all because they don't make the kind of revenue that those schools do. I actually, knowing I was doing this interview, looked it up. Last year, they, I think, made 39 million in revenue for the entire athletic department. So clearly they're not going to spend 22 million of that on paying the players. They can't afford to do that. In fact, a lot of it's sad, but a lot of these MAC schools operate at a huge deficit already, and have to borrow from their general universities to make ends meet in college athletics. When people talk about, oh, these schools are swimming in money, they're not referring to MAC schools.
So with that being said, and those who are on the outside looking in, what about those schools out there that are trying to get a piece of the pie? That's what we discuss next.
We've seen over the last 10 years, 15 years, that's kind of become the goal, right? In this most recent wave, Cincinnati had gotten left out of the major conferences when all the realignment happened at the beginning of the decade, and they had success. They went to the playoff and they built their brand, and they eventually got invited to the Big 12. And, that's going to continue to be the goal for a lot of those group of five schools. But, I don't envy, I feel bad, frankly, for the group of five schools. It's not like they were ever recruiting the same pool of players as the big boys, right? So that doesn't change because, just because they can't offer the same package, like they weren't recruiting the same athletes to begin with. I think the thing that's really hurt those schools the most is the transfer portal, because you have the ability to transfer and play right away. And so what we're seeing is basically, every guy, most of the players that are on the all Sun Belt team or the all Conference USA team, they immediately get swooped up the next year by a school that has more exposure and more money and more ability to give them NIL deals.
There are numerous examples. I'm sure you were sitting there at home thinking to yourself, well, UT's had those players that have jumped ship, gone elsewhere. BGSU, same thing. These coaches nowadays, they are trying, especially in this group of five schools, they are trying to keep their own players here. Stewart commented on that.
What's tough if you're the coach of Toledo or Bowling Green now is that as soon as a guy kind of gets on the radar, he's going to get calls from schools that want to swoop him up, and you can't blame that guy for wanting to go play in front of 100,000 people and play on national television and so forth. So it just makes it hard for these programs to have any consistency. Toledo's actually done a pretty good job of it recently. of being, a consistent contender in the MAC. But if you're in a cycle, you get lost in a cycle of your coach leaves every few years, or certainly, you find your star quarterback and then he immediately gets swooped up. That's a, to me, that's a bigger challenge. That's the thing that's going to make it harder for those schools to compete. Now, having said all that, I don't think enough attention is being placed on, for the first time ever, at least one group of five team is guaranteed a spot in the college football playoff. Never in the history of the sport has there been that kind of access. If you're a MAC school and you win the MAC championship, now they're not considered as strong as the AAC, but it's not impossible. Western Michigan with PJ Fleck got a New Year's Six berth. You could be in the playoff playing in a first round game against a big name opponent on national television, and that's going to be a really big deal.
Not only a big deal, but that would mean big dollars for the MAC school that got into that position, should it be. So I asked Stewart Mandell, as we wrap things up for this week with Stewart Mandell, I asked him what the next chapter could be in this whole ball of wax that we know as redefining college sports.
Whether the athletes will be considered employees. And there's several different cases winding their way through the system right now with plaintiffs who have, the Dartmouth men's basketball team, got an NLRB ruling that they're employees. That's being appealed. We talked about how it's optional to share revenue. If a federal judge or government decides that if you are an athlete who plays for a college team 20 hours, you are required to be paid a minimum wage. I don't know what becomes of the group of five schools at that point, because they can't, with the limited revenue they have, they cannot afford to pay hundreds of athletes a salary. That would be to me disastrous for schools. The higher level schools will be able to afford that. Disastrous for the lower level schools.
Absolutely, and I think you would see a lot of...
Stewart Mandell there joining us, of course, from The Athletic. We appreciate his time. He is college football editor-in-chief. You want to read more from The Athletic or Stewart, you can go to theathletic.com, also linked with the New York Times. We talk about that span that's being built in Detroit and Ontario right after this. Hi there once again, and thanks for joining us here on Leading Edge. I'm your host, Jeff Smith. We have done numerous stories locally on the impact of the Gordie Howe International Bridge. In fact, right here on this set just weeks ago, I had business leaders, I had real estate developers sitting here and talking about the impact that they thought this bridge, when it opens up in the fall of 2025, was going to have on our region. Now, our audience in Northwest Ohio and Southeast Michigan, we thought you would enjoy hearing from the authority, the Bridge Authority, directly here today, getting a bit of a progress report. But more than that, I wanted to dive into the how and the why. The words are being used of game changer. Those words, game changer, being used to describe how this bridge could impact life on both the Canadian side of things and on the U.S. side of things, Michigan, Ohio, to be exact, when it opens next year. So, as we said, we sought out the help of the Chief Relations Officer at the Windsor Detroit Bridge Authority this week for an update and an explanation. And today we start by talking a little bit about the progress, where the bridge is at this point.
People who are watching us on social media or driving by the area see that we're very, very close with the bridge deck to connect. We are about 36 feet away of that entire deck connecting. Now, that doesn't mean that work on the bridge deck is done. That just means the structure itself is done, and we still have about another year of construction work to do on top of that. Another very recent achievement is the completion of all of the installation of the stay cables. Now, the stay cables provide the bridge that very distinctive look that it has. There are 216 stay cables in total, and the last two, which were on the U.S. side, were installed just this week.
She talked about being 36 feet apart from the Ontario side and the Detroit side coming together. I asked her about the significance of that moment when it happens.
The construction of this project, the official construction, started in October of 2018. So work has been going on for quite a bit of time. And, those first few years, the work really focused on ground or below ground work, things like utility relocation and ground preparation. And once the work started on those towers and the towers started to build up, they reached their full height of 722 feet last year. That has really has been what has grabbed people's attention. Being able to see in our lifetime this monumental structure, this representation of Canada-US relations coming into reality, I think is what has really grabbed people and have really made people so excited about the project. I think for people watching the construction, the progress has been measured by each of those slabs of concrete that have gone in over the river. That work started in late 2022. So over 2023, this first half of 24, people have really been watching that and seeing that as the measure of progress. And I think that's why people are so excited about it and so excited about that piece coming together. We talk a lot about this bridge. The Gordie Howe International Bridge is going to be, or has the longest main span of any cable stay bridge in North America. And that's what people are seeing being constructed right now, that main span and that record that we're achieving with this bridge.
So we talked to her specifically about the word game changer and why it's being used in not only northwestern Ohio, but also southeastern Michigan.
Gateway here, the Detroit-Windsor Gateway, represents the busiest commercial land border crossing between Canada and the US. 25% of all goods, all trade that goes between the two countries happens right here. And there's a real recognition for the fact that the economies, not just of Detroit and Windsor, not just Michigan and Ontario, but further out between the states and the provinces. In fact, the two countries relies on this corridor being as strong, as efficient, and as effective as possible. There are existing crossings here and they're working, but it's really a recognition of what's needed to make this corridor really vital to the economic growth of our two areas. And I think that's part of the reason why people are calling it a game changer, because they're seeing it as that conduit for economic growth.
It's hard to believe because we're seeing this come to fruition here in 2024. But one of the things that she told me during the course of our interview, she said that this has been in the planning stages since back in 2020. So you go back, 2002 and 2000, going all the way back. So over 20 plus years. And now we are seeing it come together. During that period of time, we've had to go through a lot as far as economic ups and downs, and of course, the pandemic and what that taught us. I asked her specifically because we all became more adept at hearing about supply chain issues. We talked about that and how this bridge could help.
So redundancy or crossing choice, which people will have. System connectivity, and by that I mean the Gordie Howe International Bridge will connect directly into the interstate system in Michigan and the highway system in Ontario, allowing for goods to move more quickly, allowing for that just-in-time delivery, that trip repeatability, strengthening the supply chains. Again, as you noted, during COVID, we learned how important a robust supply chain is, and the bridge will support that. Allowing for improved border processing. We talk so much about the bridge, but we can't forget that part of this project is also the construction of two ports of entry, both on the Canadian side and the US side. And these are going to be the largest ports along the Canada-US border. And then finally, capacity. This bridge isn't just about, and this corridor isn't just about being able to manage the capacity, the truck and the passenger vehicles that flow now, but the capacity for the future as well. So those key achievements is what we're going to deliver with Gordie Howe.
Yeah, as she said there, the big difference here with this bridge, it locks right into highway systems versus what we saw with the Ambassador Bridge. Finally, we talked about investments that are already popping on either side. She has the perspective from the Ontario side.
Here in the Windsor area, there's been some new investments. There's a battery plant being constructed. And if you think about how much trade moves across the border, a huge agri-food business in Windsor and Essex County, where you see a lot of those goods moving across the border. So I think, and definitely Ohio has been so supportive of this project over all of the years that we've been talking about it and moving through with the construction. I've had the opportunity opportunity to speak with Ohio-based business owners who have talked to me about looking forward to that efficient movement, looking forward to having the predictability and the flexibility in terms of crossing. And we're hearing those same things here on the Ontario side.
So once again, fall of next year, that's when we're looking at the opening of the new Gordie Howe International Bridge. We'll wrap things up for this week here on Leading Edge right after this. Well, welcome back for a final time here on Leading Edge for this week. Hey, just a reminder, you can always go to the WTOL YouTube page, and there you see right there our Leading Edge section. You just go to YouTube and search Leading Edge, and you can find all of our past shows, including our interview you see there right at the top with Carol LaBounty, who as we tape this show is probably making her way around France. She went to Normandy. Her father was an original member of the Band of Brothers, and she told us her tale. Dan Cummins and me sitting right here told us her tale of her father being a paratrooper and landing in Normandy on D-Day. So a lot of stuff there. We cover topics of the economy, health, education, politics, you name it. We love doing it. And this week, obviously, we were talking NCAA college football and college sports. We hope you enjoyed our conversation. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Jeff Smith. If you have any ideas for our show, be sure to email us here at WTOL 11. We hope you have a great rest of your week. We'll see you next time here on Leading Edge.